Hi, everybody. It's Erin, and I'm going to tell you a story, and it's the life of death. And there are many stories, and this is one. And it happens to be a Western civilization one, so I'm not going into anything except that. Now, this is this picture is brilliant because this fellow who created this drummer, he was part of our hog farm reunion, our 50th anniversary, really, in September. And that was sitting where we had a table where we had pictures of everybody where who was with us but was gone, had died. And so we had our memorial table, and this guy here was the drummer. And so I just love this. This is a brilliant sculpture. He's from Western California. So that's memento mori. Do not forget that we will die, the D word, because a lot of people like to say the D word instead of death. Death has got a bad reputation. And so that's why I want to tell you this story from Plato, because it's a Western civilization myth, and it's really rich, and it has a lot of detail, and it's just one of so many ways that we observe ourselves as sort of alive and well and thinking. And then there's this event that can take place, and does inevitably take place, where we die, and or someone else dies that we know, and it opens up the door to the greatest mystery that exists. There is no other mystery as great as life and death. And I think that by starting off with this picture, which is an analemma, and it's a movie that shows the movement of the sun through the sky over a period of 12 months, and the fellow had a camera where he took a picture about every month or two, and just on its own, and then it tracked the movement of the sun as seen against the backdrop of the sky, which is absolutely brilliant when you look at it, because it's an infinity symbol. And each of the points that I have marked here are deaths. And same with this one right here. Now, they're deaths because it's the death of a season. And so in the Northern Hemisphere, December 31st is the death of the year in the winter sense, whereas that is the opposite in, say, Australia, in Sydney, where it becomes then summer. So what we have is a perfect, natural, and not scary image of what death is. So I don't want to end the show. And it does reincarnate, doesn't it? I mean, astrologers have an unusual kind of brain where they can think differently, and everything is a symbol. And from that symbol comes immense amount of knowledge and information. And just looking at this, you could probably spend about a half an hour staring at this sort of thinking and getting bits of it and understanding. But it's our mind that really creates such a world. This is something that I cut out of the New York Times years ago, and it's more jokey than anything, because this guy is obviously very familiar with Dante and his Divine Comedy and the paradise, okay, and then purgatory. And so the island of purgatory has all got its 9 levels, vestibule to hell. At the top we have Dante and Virgil, both of them Romans, one of them a little older than the other, sort of discussing the philosophy of what this is all about. But you see at the very bottom we have the 7 regular old 7 capital sins of slow to repent, pride, envy, anger, sloth. I can't read these two. But then in paradise, we have heavenly spheres, and the moon ruling fortitude, Mercury ruling good works, Venus, spiritual love, Sun, learned theology, Mars, Christian martyrdom. Interesting. Well, he was not a Christian. And Jupiter is thoughtfulness, Saturn blessed, and the other one out there is just about theological virtue, anything outside the bounds of Saturn. And when this was done, when this cartoon was made was like 10 years ago. But when Dante wrote the Divine Comedy, we didn't have the outer planets. So, this is, just a really cool look at one person's idea about the afterlife, of what happens when we go through all these various, if we've been naughty and we're slow to repent, then we go straight to Lucifer, and then there's the traitors and the flatterers and the sorcerers. I love that one. I like serious criminals and heretics. I think I fall in there. And wrathful, that's a bad thing. Avaricious misers and spendthrift, not a good thing. Gluttonous, I guess that's not good. No, gets you fat. Lustful. Unbaptized children, oh dear, pre-Christ honorable men. So you get to the first circuit, and then you get the vestibule of hell. So it's the soul of the futile, and then the ambivalent angels that can really kind of help you out. And this is sort of an interesting Western civilization comedy, if you ask me. And Dante did actually name it the Divine Comedy, this section of his book, which is a brilliant book. Now, the first thing I want to point out is so that people will become extremely conscious that Pluto does not rule death. Pluto isn't death. Hades is a place, and it's a place where we go in between lives. And Thanatos is actually the god of death. Now, Thanatos is well known because he's struggled with various people in Greek mythology who have not been able to overcome him at all, and then he then takes over. But Thanatos is a beautiful Greek word for the god of death. So we must never ever mistake Hades, because Hades is a place. And as I'm writing here, he's an experience, a form. It's actually a form of existentialism. It's a place where we wait, until we're reincarnated. We go to Hades, we hang out, and then we're allotted another life, dependent upon how much we remembered, and you'll see what all that's about. And so really Hades is the king of the underworld. And he's actually the caretaker of the people in between lives. Because when people are in transition out of the book 10 and in Plato's Republic, he talks about a man named who actually died and then came alive and remembered his tour through the various stages of getting to Hades. And so the story, the myth of E-R, is really, really interesting because it talks about a lot of philosophies that other religions don't talk about, but that they actually implicate it. Most specifically, I think Buddhism would fall into that one, and where we really actually have like a beginning, an ending, a middle point, and a start again. But the thing of it is that none of us actually know really what does go on the other side. As astrologers, we love to try and see what happens. But the thing with Hades being a place, he's actually the king, as I said, of the underworld, but he was completely alone because he was the one who drew the short straw between his older brothers, who was Zeus and Poseidon. And so Hades, Zeus, and Poseidon drew straws to see who was going to rule the sky and the oceans and the earth and the underworld. And so Hades got the short straw, so he ends up running the underworld. So he doesn't actually rule death, but he rules waiting in liminality to reincarnate. Now, we experience that when we go through something that isn't death-related, but is a form of termination, of ending, whether that's your Saturn return, you begin a new phase of your life, or whether it's, Uranus opposition and you go through your midlife transition. But we meet very often Hades in various places as a transitional place, a place where we're not really sure who we were and who we are and who we're going to become. And so we have to kind of wait and work within liminality to reincarnate. And liminality is a good word because it's like standing in the limb. It comes from the Greek limn, which means the limb, the edge, the crossover, the threshold. So he's a thresholder. And so when we think in terms of death, try not to think of transits of Pluto because they're not going to kill you. They may take all your money. There could be some serious mistakes that make in relationship. But, people don't die. I mean, I should have died. I had Pluto transiting square 3 main planets and 4 bodies in my horoscope for 10 years. And I managed to live through it. And I managed to do a lot of stuff. Like in that 10 years, I wrote 5 books. I just didn't, but I still didn't know, what I was doing until that transit was over. And then I kind of stepped across the threshold into the limb and to becoming who I was. So that's what I wanted to make sure you understood, that Thanatos was the god of death. There's many myths about him. Other agents involved in life and death that are really important are the women. And you'll notice the women have a lot more interesting jobs to do than the men. And I think that's part and parcel of, the ancient world, even though when it came to a society, it was possibly the most misogynistic origin of any culture that we have. The Western civilization is highly misogynistic. And we're experiencing that in extremely positive form right now, where people are actually saying to themselves and to other people out loud and to the newspapers, I have been taken advantage of because I am a woman. And I'm afraid that this did start, unfortunately, with the Greeks. And I have to say that we have to go back to the origins of Western civilization in order to get rid of this misogyny, in order to bring in the females who are the ones who create everything. Now, necessity is the mother. You know how we say when you're even a kid, necessity is the mother of invention? Well, necessity is Anakain, and she's the mother of the Mori, and the Mori are the fates, and they are the ones who apportion our fate and who tell us, and this is Anake here, necessitas maleo fatale calife intertu ta adamantis. She's telling the spinner, the weaver, and the cutter, the women who are Clotho, the spinner, Lachesis, the weaver, and Atropos, the cutter of the thread of our life. The fabric of our life is given to out of necessity, based upon previous actions, because there was a whole, kickback system, just like in many other theologies, where that if you don't do certain things right, or if you are really a bad person, you're going to get in trouble, and it's going to show up. And if it doesn't show up in this life, it's going to show up in the next one. And so this is what everybody's going on about here, is that she's instructing the Mori in their work, and the Mori are the 3 creators of our fates. They apportion our fate. In other words, our lot. Now, the fates I wanted to put in again, because I really like this picture of them, because it shows all 3 of them, and some of them are old. She's really old. I wonder why. But the Clotho is the spinner of the cloth, and then the weaver, and then she is looking in the book. That would be Atropos, and she's looking in the book of what you're supposed to do in your next life. And the spinner, the weaver, and the cutter of the fabrics of our lives to come, the one that we have not, that we are heading toward in this liminal space in Hades, where we don't really know when we're going to be called into our next life, and there are good there's even a good story coming up about how you can maybe assure yourself that you can remember your previous life so that you're not, going to be stuck down in Hades longer than you would like to. Because it's quite a lonely place. I mean, it's full of loads of people, and they're all sort of ghosts and, hanging about, and they live their lives. They even recognize each other. They even have conversations with each other. I mean, when you read any of the classical books like the Iliad or the Odyssey, the people go down to, well, they don't actually, but there's one instance where a hero goes down to the underworld. He wants to talk to his mother, which I think is very sweet, and there are the only other people that can actually make it down there. One is Hermes, the psychopompos. He's the one who takes you to Hades. He's the one who actually takes you down into the underworld while you wait your turn for what, to pay your debts and, get take advantage of your skills. And all of this takes place in this dark, apparently, misty, strange place where this poor fellow Pluto was all by himself with all these dead people. And so the fates, the Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, their work is being done as we enter Hades, and thus they allot our next lives. Now, in astrology, the degree of a sign is called the Mora, our lot on life. Now, this would be an older astrology, okay? Traditional astrology kind of thing. Because the Mora is our lot in life, which I find really interesting that is included, not as an astrological, but that we use that word astrologically. I think that word does come actually out of the Babylonian period. However, the astrology that we recreate in our next life has to be tested. We can't just leap into the positivity of a new life. And so what is now the story of that I want to tell, and the plane of Oblivion? There are several steps that we have to cross and go through and endure in order to get to Hades, where we then are safe and coddled, looked after by Hecate and Kerberos and Pluto and Hades. And we are we're there in various shapes and forms. Otherwise, I could tell you more stories, but it gets more complicated. But the first thing what happens, as I told you in the beginning, that dies, and he's on the burning pyre, and then he suddenly finds himself awake, and he tells the story in the 10th book of the Republic by Plato. In the 10th book, it's a great story. Is that he came back alive and told them from the pyre exactly what happened when he died and the whole story of getting to Hades. They must have been just aghast. So he has to the first thing that has to be done, the first test, and there are three major tests, and the final thing where he enters the underworld and Hecate greets him. But until then, anyone who dies would have to go across this plane, which probably was like 140 degrees in the shade. And you'll see that there's no shade. But he's got to cross it, and it's like unbearable to the point where he's not going to make it. He's not going to make it. No, there are people who have not made it through there, and when they've gotten to a very significant place next, which is most important, is the river Lethe. Now, when he reaches the river Lethe, what happens is you are warned by the goddess of forgetfulness not to drink too deeply because you're dying of thirst. I mean, how long? Look at this poor devil. He's, being dragged along, and he's, God knows how long it took him to walk that plane of oblivion and cross it, but it's hot as hell. And River Lethe is where you are just desperate to drink and drink and drink, but you do not drink too deeply, else you will forget your previous life. You will not recall it. It's called anamnesia, to forget. Okay? Amnesia, we all know, is to forget. Anamnesia is to be away from forgetfulness. He has to be in anamnesia and not forget, but to remember. And I guess he managed to do that, to go through these periods of time where the more I allowed the traveler only to drink from the river of Mnemosyne, which is memory, and not from the river Lethe, because there are two rivers. Otherwise, you end up like this, just this lovely sort of asleep. And I think you probably know sometimes when you fall asleep in your, you know what I mean, in your psyche, like that you are amnesiac, yeah, and that you've fallen into the whole river Lethe mythology where you can't remember who you were or who you're going to be or who you are now. You're just somewhere in between. So the idea is to drink only from the river of memory and not from the river Lethe, who causes one to lose their memory of previous lives and their commitment to the next life with consciousness and fervent intent. There has to be intention in order to incarnate, to reincarnate. Now, anamnesis, I just wrote here, is essentially a warning not to forget your life and go to sleep. Otherwise, what will happen is when you get to the underworld as a transitional place, you won't find out who you're going to be and where you're going to go, and it could be forever that you end up in this liminal state of being with Hades, hanging out in the underworld. Now, there's some fine people down there. There's stories of Theseus going down into the underworld to visit his mother, which is very sweet, and also stories about how Agamemnon was still really angry at Menelaus for taking his wife away. And I mean, so it's sort of like a normal life, only it's down there, wherever down there is. And so some of the stories you get out of the classics are quite amusing. It's like, okay, so we get the two great heroes of the Trojan War, one already dead and the other one really still jealous because he had stolen his wife. Yeah, so human experiences go on down in this Hades place. And remember, Pluto didn't do it. Pluto is not the god of killing people and dying. Now, the next thing is horrible. We have to pay this fellow a lot to get ourselves across the whole river of blood, if you will, and pay tremendously. They always said it was a penny for the ferryman, but that's sort of not real as we see in the mythologies. But it's ideally he's working for his own self. He's highly ambitious. He is an incredibly avaricious individual, Hades, or Chiron. And Charon is the one who is ferrying the dead persons. And here's another slightly more romantic image, but you still see the skeletons and skulls going down the river Charon. And so when we get to that river, we have obviously basically succeeded the river Lethe, gone through yet the other plane that's across through to the river, paid the ferryman. If you're trying to sneak across, don't try, because you'll pay really, really a lot, and maybe not just money. But this is possibly one of the most powerful figures that exists in the Greek mythology of life and the ending of life and death, is chair on the ferryman, because we still make comments in, modern days of like, well, you got to pay the ferryman. And so people aren't necessarily, um, you know, Greek and Latin scholars to understand what mythology does. I mean, that it should reach up so deeply from the origin sources so long ago, 2,500, 3,000 at least 3 years, 3,000 years ago, Western civilization began to rise and create a lot of these mythological stories. Now, what we do once we get into this area of desire, um, there is a wonderful story. Well, it's not really, because it's always painted very badly, as if Hades had actually swept up from the underworld with his golden chariot and white horses and snatched Persephone, who had wandered from her school group, into the place where she could sniff the asphodel, which isn't daffodil, and the scent of it was more like a narcissus. Have you ever sniffed a narcissus really deeply a few times and found it rather putrid? It's an interesting flower because it does smell like death. And it was the flower that Persephone was so attracted by, because a big deal had been made by the brothers right upstairs. And even though Demeter was her mother and was trying to keep her daughter from being sucked into the underworld, she even warned her, never leave your friends, never go off alone. Just like we do our teenage daughters today. I mean, it is a mother-daughter story. And so she does wander off because she wants to sniff the flowers. And so she picks one, and bam, the earth cracks open and uproars Hades on his golden chariot and snatches her, and the earth swallows them up. And she then is greeted by Hecate, who is an underworld character with 3 dogs, Kerberos. But this is the hellebore flower. It's the most beautiful one I've seen. But it does seem to have all the energetic qualities of the light, of the beauty, if you will, of death and of rebirth. And that there is something about it that is alive, that no one is actually dead down there in the Western mythology. And so Hecate is quite famous, actually, as the greeter of the threshold. She's the one who's actually astrologically associated with the dark phase of the moon, the balsamic phase of the moon, the prophetic phase. And whenever we're in, say, a progressed lunation, where we move into the progressed sun, or moon is behind the sun by about 40 degrees, we've moved towards we're in the Hecate phase, the dark phase of the moon. It's often a very difficult phase astrologically, or in the life form, because it's a time when you don't really know what you're doing. You're in between. You see, this is what I mean by Pluto being liminal. Is that you used to be this, and that was really successful, and now you're just going, whoa, who am I? What am I doing? And that's all to do with this balsamic phase, the death phase, but it's also the prophetic phase. I mean, like Dane Rujar had that, I have it. It's not like a terrible one, but it does mean that you're very often plagued by visions and images, and that you are always in some way needing to try and predict, if you will, what's going to be happening. In that phase of the moon, the Hecate phase of the moon, people often find that they just don't have any interest in what they used to be interested in, but they're good at doing it, so they carry on. But they're really aware of the fact that that they don't know who they are, who they used to be and who they're about to become. And so it's a very valid passage of the lunation cycle. When we get to the new moon, everything changes. I mean, it's quite remarkable. I've been through a couple, and I mean, I was born under the balsamic phase, and but you know what happens when you get through it and out of it and into the new moon phase is phenomenal, because all of the work that you do under the Hecate phase of the moon has to do with that liminal space in that exists where we're not who we used to be, not who we will be, but we're somewhere in between. And she governs that, and she's also one of the guardians of the crossroads, which is she was a really good friend of Hermes, and the crossroads are always guarded by Hecate and Hermes, because when we have to make a threshold crossing, we take our life in our hands. I mean, if we look at it in a very primitive way, it would be that if you didn't take the step at the right time, you could die. Yeah, a devil would come and get you. In a modern sense of the word, if you don't take the step, then you won't get the opportunity that will be presented to you in order to become the new person that you should be. So all of you in the room have had a balsamic phase by secondary progression, moon, and a new moon. You're all old enough, I think, to have had one. So you might look back and say, okay, that's when Hecate and I got together and tried to figure out what on earth I'm supposed to be doing. Primarily, you're supposed to just put one foot in front of the other and just let it happen. But it wasn't just the snake and those things that were her gods. Let me put this down at the bottom. Hecate and Kerberos and her three-headed dog enchained by Heracles, while Hermes, the psychopompos, seems to be trying to get him to follow him back up to the upper air. And I put here before all the hell breaks loose, I guess. Well, you can see that she's trying to get rid of Heracles. And the dogs are, the dog, Kerberos is it's a dog with three heads, is her dog. And he's trying to get it, and he's got it chained up, and they are revolting against him. And you'll notice that he's looking here at someone who I now can see as Hermes, because he has the winged feet, and he's carrying his scepter, and he's pointing. He's saying, get the hell out of here, man, or you're going to be in trouble. Yeah, like she is nothing to fool with. And for some reason, he's down there wanting to take her dogs. And so we have Hermes, this, who's ever at the ready, very good friend of Hecate, ever always ready to help people in or out. In fact, at the end of the Trojan War, Hermes was the one who took all of the dead soldiers down to Hades. And in the book it says, twittering and wittering like bats in the dark. And it's all terribly romantic in this way, but it's also deadly serious. Because these are belief systems that people truly fell in line with. So does anybody have any questions or anything so far? Or comments? Because I always like that.
Aaron?
Yes?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Good. During my progress...
Hang on, is this Carolyn?
Yes, it is.
Oh, God, this is a great... Okay, I got you. Yep. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi, Aaron. During my progress balsamic, was towards the end of my teaching career, and the principal was gaslighting me, and it was just a horrible situation. I just kind of walked through it in a bit of a fog, going, this is really how horrible people can be. I had never, ever realized till that moment just how awful people on a personal basis could be.
Yeah. Well, when you meet the devil, you meet him
Yeah. Well,
in
she,
that state.
yeah, karma's a bitch. She just got fired a few years later. But what I'm saying is that it was I just walked and watched, and I was going to leave teaching, and then I just happened to be alerted. Yeah, the school secretary had said, "There's a witch hunt going on, and you're the witch."
Of course, you're Hecate. We're
Yeah.
all heck. I mean, I was the witch for 2.5 years and wore out half my friends. I mean, seriously, it was scary. I wore them out because I was like crying all the time.
I just I just was a good teacher, but I don't do well with adults. I have not done well with adults.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I really do. And that's interesting, isn't it? That you would prefer, you get on better with young people. And because when you get to the new moon phase, because this is what I was waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for, with promises from other astrologer friends and so on that it will be coming. And when I got to the new moon phase, it was subtle, but everything has changed now that I'm right out of it. So it really happens. Like, you really do, go through a death and a lot of threat,
Yeah.
during that 9 days, and Hecate is after you, and, all of the various heads of leaders and so on. And then you just sort of go through a period of dying, where the old self dies. And by the new moon, you can do many, many, many things, right? You can have new jobs, do everything. But it's not until the new moon where you really are released from that place of prophecy and death. And then, so you had some hints, and probably things have changed since the new moon, because it would be, what, about a 18 month period of time, I guess?
Yeah, it was kind of the end of 2014 that things got really dark, really dark. And well, I'll be speaking to you later. You'll be looking at my chart, but in
All right.
in some respects, they certainly, I don't know what they are. I'll talk about that when it's my turn, but I'm hoping for the new moon phase to bring some light.
It does, but it takes time. You see, like, my friend who kept every lunch that we had was always telling me about your new moon, it's going to come. And so when it finally did come, yes, everything changed. But what happens is you're still you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the circumstances around you change.
Yeah.
And if your attitude can't change, it does often take a few months for you to actually believe that this is true. I mean, it's great. It's sort of like, this can't be real. I mean, why is everything changing? I don't believe it. And so there is a kind of sense of you have to actually believe that it's actually true.
I'm also balsamic natal phase, and I find that I've lived my life in containers. And when my life in one container is over and it's time to move on to the next, there's not much left of the life I was living.
Huh.
And that's certainly true now.
That's very interesting, because I think, like, Rudyard's balsamic moon was what would have driven him to thinking in the way he did, right? I mean, of always thinking essentially retrospectively, and then very prophetically, because he really was the modern astrologer leader. And all of his stuff is available online. But the lunation cycle was actually the first book I ever read of astrology, and that would have been 65 and 66. And it made so much sense to me, that we had these phases in our lives, that it can go like a daily phase. You can do almost anything with that cycle, You know, there's the waking up, and then there's lunchtime. You know, you can look at it in many ways, but I don't think that anything is ever really stark. I mean, except for things that can be fixed. Like, you know, this morning, my email address, my assigned email address, my Gmail address wasn't working. And so that is just a drag. And so that's the kind of thing that puts you into a space where you can't control anything. And I think that, and that will come to an end. Okay, so there's a beginning, and there's a horror in the middle, and then there's an end. But with the balsamic phases of the moon, they're not quite that defined.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I would give it almost like 6 months to a year for it to evolve into the new, the whole new opportunity that you're going to have.
I think I've had the opportunity and I've used it, but it hasn't been the fulfillment from an outer life the way I used to get with teaching kids. I've been put in a position where I have to go and be inside myself and figure out who I am, because I never knew.
Well, maybe that's what I mean, writing definitions of what something means is a bit awkward. You have to be very good at doing it by using words in certain ways. And what you just described, I'm not making this as an excuse for an astrological misdemeanor. It's not. I'm just saying, look, this is you. This is how it's working for you.
Yes.
Yeah, and that what has you come out of that, you will recognize it yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. Now I can point it out as an astrologer and say, well, this from here to here, you're going to have this happen. That's the mathematics of it, right? And then you're going to say, okay, what will my experience be? Okay. And I'll say, well, I can describe the experiences I have, you know, a loss of purpose, a loss of direction, a feeling of, you know, apprehension, nothing is working. I'm not who I used to be. I'm not who I'm going to be. All these kind of, you know, nagging things that happen. And I could say, well, it's going to stop on November 8th, for example. You know, and that's your new moon. Well, don't expect suddenly to turn into, like, a queen of the educational department or something like that. You have to really begin to interpret for yourself what
Yes.
astrology is saying.
Yeah.
And that makes for a really good astrologer. That's your best lesson.
Yeah.
Is yourself.
Yes, I believe that.
Well, listen, thank you for that example. That's really great, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who has anything they want to say? Because we just got a couple more minutes on this tape class. Anybody else have any lunar or any underworld experiences where they were taken into the underworld and then, you know, had to make bargains and return as Persephone comes back for half the year? Because that's part of it too.
So, Erin, the progressed lunar cycle takes about 30 years?
Actually, yeah, it's a little slower. What's interesting is it's about the same timing as Saturn. So every so often you'll get a Saturn moon, what's called Saturn dogging the moon. And so Saturn is faster, it eventually passes, and the progressed moon is slower. So the progressed moon is like 28 and a half days, and progressed Saturn and transiting Saturn is 29 and a half years.
Right, so that's followed by the Saturn return. Both Saturn, the first and second.
Right. So, if you're having your Saturn return, you're having your progressed lunar return somewhere in there.
Wow, that's interesting. Thank you so
Well,
much.
it is because you see, Saturn is the feminine and Saturn is the masculine, and the father and the mother is the moon.
Yes.
If we look at it this way,
Right.
And there are 5 years where people have what's called Saturn dogging their moon. It's like their Saturn transit is moving along with their progressed moon, and they're going, "Oh my God, what's happening?" And I'm going, oh, it's nothing. It's just 5 years. Next. No, I do. I don't do anything. I'm not that stupid. Um, I could be that silly, but not that stupid. Yeah, I do talk about that it is an extraordinary period of time. Everybody gets it at some time in their life, once. Even if you've been born with Saturn, it could be actually Saturn opposite your moon by transit as your moon progresses. Yeah?
Right.
So watch for those contact, because it's about coming to terms with your, what your age is about and what your feelings are doing and how you're able to, really deal with being disciplined and going to the metal, to get done what you have to do. It's hard times.
But this is great information. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? We have about 15 minutes left in this meeting. So any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I've got 10 minutes, and actually, I don't think I have. Let me go. Let me just go here, because I think when I'm done here, I've
can
actually.
anybody hear me?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, hi. I can wait till you're done.
I
just wanted to ask you one thing. Oh, you
No,
were just
please.
finishing up?
I was just looking
Okay,
to
thank
see
you.
No, you go ahead. We have time for talking. That was my input.
Well,
Because you see, I
thank
just
you.
gave you a Western civilization mythology based upon the philosophy of the West. Now, there are many, that's why I said this is only one story. There are many others. Every single religion or individual has a belief system about what happens around dying and what happens where they go. There isn't a religion per se that doesn't believe that you don't go anywhere, that you just go into existential despair. One of the most hilarious ones, and I was going to put a picture of it, but something went wrong with my email this morning, and I didn't have time to add about 5 more photos, but one of them it's a joke, and they say that when the Muslims die, there are something like 25 virgins waiting for them in the heavens. Well, there's a picture of 25 nuns with guns all lined up. That's called the virgins of the Muslims are going to meet. So we can make fun of religious aspects too, but they truly believe that because they're men, they'll get these women when they go up there, and that's that. Um, there's the Buddha and his feelings and understanding and possibly knowledge. I mean, because not every culture is going to have, like, its own culture is different. We're very different from, say, the Tibetans. We're very different from the Russians. We're very different from, and they all have their different belief systems, and all of them are true for them. Yeah. So mine is true as a Westerner. Myself, I'm a little existential, I actually don't know what's going to happen and what's on the other side. And I believe that people should find a place to put that so that they can live with it. I mean, when you're younger, you don't really think about death a lot, but when you start moving into 70, you start thinking, wait a minute, we're running out of time here. and so if I'm going down to meet Hecate and Persephone's there in the spring, then I'll be happy because I can play with her. She's a playful girl. Because, with Demeter's revenge, when she was stolen and she became the queen in her own right of woman, it was like a rite of passage for a teenage girl. And it's all symbolic and it's all psychological. And so, when she sneaks away from her group of other school kids, let's say she's 14, and then she meets this incredibly sexy guy in a golden chariot coming up, and he's going, I'm going. I'm with him. I'm going with you. So she goes down, and then she treats him so well, and everything is fine, and they actually do get on well, and she becomes the guardian of the slave of the shades. She's the one who's there to help them. So she actually becomes a princess, and a queen of the underworld. And this is Demeter up here, just waiting. She'd been 9 days like on a rage, founding cults and doing all sorts of stuff and making people partly mortal. And then there's Hermes, see? So there's Hermes, and he's seeing Persephone off, and she's going, Mama, Mama, I'm all grown up. I can come home now. And but the deal was that she would come back every 6 months. And so that sounds to me like an ideal marriage, really. I mean, I wouldn't want somebody around me all the time, but I wouldn't mind maybe 6 months on and 6 months off. Everybody has their own needs.
Welcome back, everyone. We're now doing part 2, astrology stories about deaths. And our first volunteer is Carolyn. So Carolyn, please go ahead.
Okay. I promise I won't ask you when I'm going to die. Okay. I'll just start giving context. I'm asking my cat to stop meowing. Enough?
Right. Yeah. I can hear her. She's fine.
Okay.
Cats are acceptable. So,
I had a past life regression when I went to Los Angeles, 86, 87. And I saw a council of lavender figures, tall lavender robe figures. And I was being sent back to life. And I know at that time, because my mother told me, that she was afraid she was going to die because a cousin, a very good friend of hers, had died in childbirth, actually of an illegal abortion, but had died as a result of being pregnant. And my mother thought she was going to die too. Anyway, so the lavender robed figures are telling me, you're going. You've got to go. And I'm sliding down this slide into life. Just screaming blue murder, not wanting to go. Now, when I was a child, I used to have nightmares about those lavender robed figures. And they patrolled in between my parents' bedroom and mine.
Wow.
And then I subsequently saw them in healing sessions and learned that they were good.
They were guardians, yeah. Lavender.
Guardian. So, I want to talk about and put before you my attitude towards death. I've always wanted to leave. At 7 months, I had the measles. If you see, Uranus is at 0 degrees Cancer.
Yes, I do.
It's out of bounds. And I've just never wanted to be here. So at 7 months, I nearly died of 107-degree fever. And my grandfather, who apparently had been with me when I was being burned as a witch, he killed me. He killed me so that I wouldn't suffer in the flames. So all my life I've had a tenuous wish to be alive. That's become more conscious.
I think that has, like, even though when I say Pluto is not death, he is the king of the underworld where we go after we die. Mm-hmm. And nothing dreadful goes on. There are different parts of Hades, that exist, and they have very special mythologies and special places for heroes and so on. But Pluto isn't death, but it is about the place. And you have Pluto at 16 Leo, and it happens to be pretty much squared by Mars conjunct Chiron in Scorpio. And so we have Pluto dispositing both Mars and Chiron. And so there may be a seduction towards this idea that death would be a very relaxing place, considering.
Yes.
And so I see it as more of a seduction of like a Persephone being called to the underworld to help look after other people as opposed to be dead. So I'm not really thinking that it's about you dying. I'm thinking it's about your attraction to and seduction by the mystery.
Yes.
And so this would lead you into things like astrology. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So it would be a perfect signature right there, because you've got Pluto at 16, Venus at 24 Scorp, and Mars at 19, or sorry, Leo, square Mars at 19, Chiron at 22. And so essentially it really does bring that in, that that you have a kind of seductive feeling about anything that has to do with like love or passion. I mean, you'd be a very passionate person. You also have, a tremendous curiosity about what is behind the curtain. So you spend a lot of your life, and especially your childhood, in imagining all these things, but not to say that they're not happening, but that you experience them and are aware of them. To me, is presents in the horoscope as Mars Chiron square Venus Pluto.
And right now, Jupiter is conjunct
Right there
on my Mars, and I had a bout of pneumonia where.
Oh.
Yeah, it was, and my fear of having to rely on others, my fear of dying and have my cat eat my face and my daughter finding me or something, just...
I know the thought.
Yeah. And so I had to have a second x-ray, and I need a CAT scan because I could have nothing, or I could have cancer, or I could have blood clots, or I could have nothing. Nobody knows.
Right.
22nd, which is a long way away to me. And every so often I fall into great fear, not of death,
No.
but being helpless.
But right, exactly.
And having to ask for help.
Of losing control.
Yes.
And that's one of your big things that if we were in council, we would be talking about, like trying to control circumstances which you really can't.
Yeah.
And that this is part of your, what I would call your family dynamic, that it was inherited.
Yes.
In your family, that you would have these anxieties and fears. And also to, the moon in Virgo is coming, it's actually square to Jupiter, but moon in Virgo, is terribly conscious of its body and what its body is doing and what it wants to do and whether it will or not behave. Because Virgo is not particularly one of the strongest medical signatures for the moon to be in, is Virgo. Not the strongest, but also because it's actually really well, widely, but sex has, just passed the sextile to Mars, and Chiron, it's applied to, well, it's its last degree, isn't it? It's the last degree of your horoscope. Interesting. So that everything in all the transits that take place around your horoscope, they actually all end up at the moon. That's the final touch. Do you understand what I mean?
I do.
Yeah. So it's like your emotional body picks up everything that's going on. It dumps all the transit experiences right into your moon and says, okay, your body has got to deal with this. Your psyche has to deal with this. Yeah, so you're naturally going to be a bit fearful.
Okay.
But it doesn't actually say anything about, it being, a dramatic or terrible death in which other people, are really shocked and horrified and cats devour one. I mean, it's true. It is what would happen. And if it's something that you're really afraid of, I would give somebody else your key.
Yeah, I have.
Without sounding like a nutcase, just let them know that, if anything should happen to me or you don't hear from me, someone that you know really well, give them a key to your house.
Yeah. And I know that my daughter, if she didn't see me online or she couldn't get in touch with me, she
She'd be
would,
right there.
well, she's in Newfoundland, but she would get probably her father, God help us all.
That's fine.
No, I shouldn't say that. He was really, really nice when I was having my pneumonia.
Yeah,
But
no, you know, I mean, your ex-husband is, I mean, he does, you know, you guys once did love each other. You have a child.
yeah,
Yeah, he's going to show up for the meeting. He'll show up.
okay.
Yeah, because, and the other thing that would worry me is looking at this Pluto, Venus, and Saturn in your fifth house. The one that you should never worry about is losing your child.
Oh, good. That is.
I knew you didn't want to say that, but
Yeah.
I needed to tell you, your daughter is not going to die before you. And stop worrying about it, because it just isn't going to happen. That is not your tragedy.
I just have always thought that your child dying before you
It's
is
the worst.
it's just so
It's the worst.
incredibly wrong.
Yep. It's the wrong order out of nature. Well, Carolyn, listen, thank you for telling us this. This is really interesting, huh?
Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, and look, you've got a nice Jupiter's trine to your Leo stuff, and I think the square to your moon. How's your weight?
Oh, terrible. Up and down, up and down.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. Yeah, well, look, just take care of yourself, and start thinking about these lavender cloaked fellows being your guides, your guardians. I mean, Pisces rules your 12th house of soul, and lavender is a Pisces color.
I didn't know that.
So they've been floating around there in your 12th house trying to alert you to various neuroses that you've got, and possibilities.
I know I'm conscious of my guides. I know that my horse, who passed 8 years ago, is always around.
That's very sweet.
Yeah.
Yes, my cats are too. They stick around. They're there. And the next cat I got after my 19-year-old cat died, she'll live 19 years, which will be longer than me likely. And but all my cats are 19, and they all replace the other. They're found in a particular place. There's something really weird about, well, I'm going to go here. I'll get dropped off by somebody, and I'll be a kitten on the road, and somebody will find me. And yeah, so that's what happened. So yeah, you have some, I think that, your moon square Jupiter is highly optimistic, but it also, is your whole sort of digestive and everything system as well. I'm
in a lack of money stage, and I don't know how it will change, but it's always changed before. But
good.
it's like taking care of myself, like supplements or acupuncture or doing things like that are just, I don't have the money to do that. So it's just a worry, but I will just go to my lavender guides and see what happens.
Yeah. In another kind of session, we could look at work, but at the same time, I just want to assure you that you are protected. Yes, that's what they're doing. I mean, that's what I would say.
Yeah.
And Neptune, the ruler of the 12th, is in Libra, conjunct the vertex of amazing encounters, conjunct the sun, which says, okay, so we've got, a very vivid imagination, darling, really. And one of those things that you would be having an imagination is about, meeting interesting people at unusual times. And fortunately, they're all, sort of clustered there in your sixth house. So you have had some health issues, but I don't know that that's going to be a problem right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome, Carolyn. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you, Carolyn. Erin, we have our next volunteer is Vanessa. And yes,
just a minute.
No, keep going.
Vanessa?
No, Guido is her father who died.
I don't.
Guido.
What?
Go back.
I don't have a Vanessa.
Guido.
It's Guido.
This one.
But this is Guido.
Yeah.
Where's Vanessa?
It's my father.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Erin. Thank you. This is
Oh,
Vanessa.
hi.
Actually,
Hi, Vanessa. Oh, great. I get it now.
Yeah, Guido is my father. Oh, was my father. Well, is my father.
Yeah, he's still your dad. He's just not here.
Yeah. So yeah, the when I saw the post, I thought, oh, this is excellent because it's been a year, just a little over a year since my father died, and so
Right.
I in a sort of a strange comedic way, the minute he's dying, I'm like, take a look at the clock on the wall in the hospital and have to check what time is it.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Yeah, the exit point is very important, I think.
Yeah,
Very important.
and in many ways, I think he went pretty peacefully, as illnesses go. But I guess I should tell you the story a little bit.
Yeah, what would you like to know? Because I'm just seeing Mars here square Saturn and the moon conjunctive vertex and, Pluto on the descendant at the time of death, which actually is when Jim Lewis died. He was born with Pluto rising and he died when Pluto was setting. The astrocartographer.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I think it just would be interesting to hear your thoughts in general about it because it was really my first witnessing of death.
So you were there.
I was there. Actually, funny enough, I was there for the whole point, and I thought, okay, the last breath is coming, and then it was going, if you will, slowly, and I thought, okay, I'll just step into the bathroom for a split.
That's exactly when they go.
That's when he went.
You can't. You're hanging around, and they're waiting for you to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, and there was a couple of friends
and so
there.
Pluto had just risen.
Yeah, and I was like so bummed. And a friend of mine was like, "Oh, don't worry." He just thought, "You're leaving, so I'm going too."
No, actually, that's happened with Mom. I looked after my mom,
Mm-hmm.
and for like 7 weeks, and there was only one time when my uncle and I would be away, and we all had to go. I had to take my daughter to what they call a cattle call for modeling, and and he had to go home and feed his horses, and so we got the neighbor to come in. It was only 1 hour, and then I was at the agency in the hotel where my daughter was being seen by model agencies, and the phone rang, and her agent came over, and he says, "Erin, I don't know why I have to tell you this, but your mother just died." And I went, "It's perfect. She was waiting for me to get the hell out so she could just have some peace and go." Yeah, so that's what, when people die, and he had Mars square Saturn. It's almost like he waited 2 days longer. Like Mars is 25 degrees past the square to Saturn. It's like he had reached his frustration point with being in his body. And so like a couple of days later, then you go to the bathroom and he says, "Oh, phew, I don't have to let her be involved in this part. She can come and look after me afterwards, but not now. Not now. It's very private death."
Yeah. So
and it's a lovely one. Look at that. Venus and Neptune and Pisces, and yeah, it seems to be quite a pleasant.
It was pretty quiet. Yes, it was very peaceful.
Quite a pleasant death, and it's all under that Jupiter opposite Uranus square by Pluto. So that's a collective aspect, but in a personal sense, that really does have to do with him having reached a personal time, even though the collective is going mad, a personal time in his life where he had reached a point of having achieved the unique and revolutionary ideas that he had, and that he had gone about as far as he can go, Pluto, with his life and his ideas and his work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he died right after the Women's March in New York, and I arrived in New York on the day of the march, and it was traffic and everything else. And
well, you're so fortunate to have been there. It's such an honor to actually be present at someone's death and to be part of it. Even if you were in the bathroom, it didn't matter. It just happened. But you were there, and it's an honor.
No, I think it is, yeah. I
Yeah.
think it is.
Yeah. And with Pluto rising, it was destiny. It had to be, or setting, sorry.
Hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
you're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this.
Okay, I guess who's next?
Okay, next chart is, we're not sure, Erin, the next chart.
Oh, sorry. Right. I think it's Derek. Derek's been haunting us.
Okay, that's Alice. So go ahead, Alice.
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
So this is the chart of my high school sweetheart. He passed away
Oh,
way too young. It was quite a surprise to me and to his entire family when he left. It was a very long relationship for me. You know, when you're a teenager, you don't expect that you're going to spend almost 4 years with someone, and you know that nothing really goes truly wrong. We ended our relationship when he went away to college. Oh, I need to speak a little louder. Okay, sorry about that.
I can hear you fine, but go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, so how old is Derek in this? I mean, he
I
died.
think he was 26 at the time of his passing. I could be, I think that he was about 26 years old at the time he passed away.
Oh,
Yeah, one thing that I feel comes out really prominently in his death chart in relation to his natal is he has Neptune square the nodal axis, and he was a very creative person. He was a writer. A lot of his writing is actually something his family and his friends are paying very close attention to now, sort of going through it for clues, looking at it as, you know, weaving the stories of his life together with his death. And you were mentioning the psychopath earlier.
Yeah, Moon, Sun, Mercury in Aquarius,
Yeah.
opposite the Sun. No, the Sun was opposing it when he died.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And then I believe there was also another thing going on with Mercury in that chart as well. Look at the smaller one. Yeah, so Mercury was opposing his sun and moon. And then I believe the sun was actually opposing his natal Mercury.
Yeah, that whole stellium. So how did he die?
He died of a heroin overdose. It was an
Oh,
accident
great.
overdose, and yeah, he was found a few days after.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I've come upon these things when I was a teenager in the 60s. I walked in on a friend of mine who was my partner in light shows, doing all this stuff with the Canadian Council and so on. I walked in one morning and he shot himself in the head.
Oh,
And
no.
it was like, oh God. And then another one died of heroin overdose the next day. And it was like, oh my God, I'm getting out of town because I was running the psychedelic shop and doing light shows and stuff. But that is really, sorry, it's a tragedy.
Yeah, it really is.
Look at how everything had built up. I wish this was a bigger chart. I wish I'd known about this death chart. Because I can just see Saturn and Venus and Uranus and Neptune all together, all of which are being opposed by natal Jupiter, transiting Jupiter.
Yeah, Jupiter at the time, I believe, was within a few degrees of opposing his.
Yeah, that's the overdose right there. Overdose of Neptune, and Pluto is at his Neptune as well, pretty close.
Mm-hmm. I
And
wrote
so,
down things with it just because I got to see the chart a little bit more clearly. So
yeah,
the transiting north node was on his natal Pluto. Uranus was on
yep,
his north node. Pluto
yeah.
on his natal Neptune, and transiting Neptune on his IC, or fairly close to it. It had been hovering.
Well, you see that's the thing with Neptune, you know, and it has what's in his third house, really.
Mm.
The transiting, the death time. Yeah, transiting is something early Pisces, and Neptune has to do with drugs. I mean, we didn't have drug addiction until Neptune was sighted,
Mm.
Did you realize that there was I mean, women were drinking laudanum, and men were alcohol, but there was no drug addiction as we know it today until after Neptune was sighted. It was within months that Merck Sharp and Dome isolated the compound from the coca leaf to create cocaine.
Oh, wow.
Oh yes. And so ever since then, we've had nothing but trouble with drugs. And it's getting worse. And so when did this take place? Neptune, Pluto was where?
This was July of 2013.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
And you knew that he was using?
I had some idea. He always had a special relationship with drugs. He liked the otherworldly quality things that would take him away. I think he thought they'd make him
Oh yeah.
a bit more creative.
Well, yeah, I mean there's a lot of attraction to Neptune is very seductive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really is. And it's the one that takes you into the place where you're in the dreamland. And if you're a person of great pain, which it's very likely he was, Saturn, Venus, Uranus, Neptune, all together in his natal chart, opposed by the vertex. We see an aspect of Mars and Sun, Moon, Mercury all together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it would strike me that he was in a lot of pain, like emotional pain.
I think he definitely was.
And it's one of the greatest ways of trying to kill the pain. The unfortunate fact is that it's highly addictive and it's likely to kill you. I mean, what they've got now with fentanyl and that kind of stuff, I mean, it's just terrifying for young people.
It definitely is, yeah.
And so essentially, he's a generational archetype. And his death has moved him into the realm of the archetype as opposed to the individual.
Absolutely.
And he's actually, his horoscope the interior part of like his natal chart. Oh, there it is. God, I'm crazy. I'm looking down at this little tiny thing. Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. So he has indeed, well, he's got Moon and Sun square Pluto. So he's drawn from the earliest time in his life into the darkness and into the underworld, into where it's interesting and really dangerous and edgy. And there's a lot of gifts and talents that are associated with it. It's very inventive, very creative. And so that he wants to use these talents because it's sextile to Mars. The problem is this Saturn-Uranus lacking in self-worth, conjunct Saturn-Venus, lacking in self-worth, feeling not particularly, loved or beautiful as a child. And the Uranus and Neptune conjunction is an extremely important. Was this like 1960? When was he born?
He was born in the 80s. He was born in 1986.
86.
Yeah. Oh no, I think he was 87 actually. I definitely put it down. Yeah, he was 87. January 29th, 1987.
Yeah, because that Uranus Neptune actually became Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune very soon after he was born. It would have been about 1988 or 9. So that when Saturn and Venus had moved to Uranus and finally up to conjoin Neptune, which means Saturn, Uranus, Neptune were a big conjunction in 1989-ish. Okay, I don't have my ephemeris. It's buried under paper. And that was a time where there was a global depression, like people were undergoing, the whole world was undergoing a global depression. And, he would have been affected by that tremendously. And that's why I kept looking at this tiny chart and seeing, well, what was going on? I mean, in transit-wise, that finally brought him to that place.
I think one of the things that happened when he was younger, it wasn't so much, lack of love or anything like that. His Jupiter in his fourth house was very prominently apparent. His family was great. I think he just always felt like a bit of an outsider. There was definitely
Yeah,
Aquarian influence, the balsamic moon to the sun, of
yeah,
he was very prophetic too, as you were saying earlier about people with his balsamic position. There were a lot of things that he had said and he had written about that ended up coming true, especially post life. And if you read his writing even now, you're like, wow, if only I had known you had said this before. It was definitely there.
yeah. And it would be, and this is a problem. Like I wrote on my my Facebook article, my um, website. I wrote an article on Keith Cobain, on Kurt Cobain, because I was so outraged by his death, outraged at because of his background. And now your boy didn't have that kind of background with Ritalin and so on as a ADD, but I think he was a handful.
Yes, yes, he was.
He was a handful. I mean, Jupiter square, all that Sagittarius. Wow, that's somebody who's really going full tilt and looking for the unusual and seeking the mystery. Looking through Neptune and also this Pluto at 9 Scorpio.
Absolutely. And you're talking a little bit before about
The Sun, Moon is square Pluto, and so he's seeking death. I mean, people do. They don't always die, but he was a death seeker. He put himself in a position where he could put himself right on the edge.
Absolutely. His childhood bedroom and into his teens was decorated with Halloween decorations. He was obsessed with horror movies. You walk into
Yeah,
his bedroom and it looked like a museum for Halloween. It was,
perfect.
yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So he lived his life as he should, and it ended, unfortunately, for everybody else. But there was a lot of pain going on there,
Absolutely, there was.
emotional and psychological pain. And so he had to do it. And being this balsamic moon, he was seeing everything that was happening all the time. I mean, he was just too sensitive.
Very much so. There are a few pieces of his writing I've read now as I've gotten older, and I look back and I'm like, gee, you noticed that about me, or you noticed that about this person, and
Wow.
I mean, his other family members as well have said some of the same things to me, and just kind of shocked that he was sitting there the whole time, seeing everything as it was.
Well, wasn't lacking perspective.
No,
I mean, that's the thing. The clarity of Aquarius is really quite something. And then by the time he had the build up to that long conjunction that took place in the 80s, let me see the death chart. Saturn 5 Scorpio. That's not a very nice, happy little chart going on with Saturn squaring his moon and sun.
no,
So he people, that was an accident. People die of overdoses. They don't do it themselves. It's not typical. I mean, they usually just want to get high and feel better and everything's going to be fine. But he was doing it at a time when he was risking his life.
absolutely.
I would also say it might have been contaminated.
Yeah, that is something that we were concerned with at the time. His
Yeah.
mother was talking about that. There had been a seizure of heroin on the coast, and so there was a lot of
Uh,
product, being dumped onto the market just because people
yeah.
didn't want to get high, and so it might
Yep.
be a bit more dangerous than it needed to be.
Yeah, no, I think that there was contamination involved in it. There's too much Pisces going on, and Neptune as well, which is sort of like, that was the beginning when they started adding to drugs, making them stronger, adding different focus
Are
chemicals to
you
them.
saying, like when Neptune and Chiron sort of moved into Pisces, or around that time?
It would be, actually, it was.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
Yeah, because it was. Yeah. And that's where the collective need for anesthetic, yeah, just like we were talking about, anesthetic anamnesia, forgetfulness, not recall. You just don't want to be there. You just want to be in your whole world. That's a very Chiron Neptune kind of experience. And they're both, actively involved with Jupiter, which is excess, and in a sextile to Mars or to Pluto. So we got Jupiter opposite Pluto squared by Uranus, which is like a sudden, absolutely, completely accidental, but contaminated.
I see what you're saying there. That's really interesting, looking at the death chart from that perspective. I hadn't done that, and thank you so much for pointing that out.
Yeah, it wasn't his fault. He just hurt too much.
Yeah, I think he did.
And he got the wrong stuff.
I think one of the things with very sensitive people in their younger years is just kind of getting through that
Oh,
and
God.
to a
No
stable
kidding.
place where you can, be in your sensitive self and not feel like the world is out to get you. It takes a while.
No kidding. It does. It takes almost 35 years. You got to get to 35 to 40 before you really can start really realizing it's just a matter of luck and fortune if you're alive.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he looks like he was poisoned really more than anything. So that, I mean, by bad drugs.
Yeah, it was a shock. It was totally unexpected. He was living a productive everyday life. He was running every day on a daily basis. He held down a decent job, and it just you know took everybody by a huge surprise.
Yeah, well, he just had his progressed lunar return a year ago, and was moving into a whole new phase.
Yeah, I think he was.
And he has.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, we miss him deeply, but
It's always us that hurt from that, He's fine.
yeah, I like.
He went off, actually, he went off in a pretty good state. Jupiter rising. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing. I'm actually am sort of laughing as, I come out of a drug culture myself, right, from the 60s. And I am sort of laughing. This is like, whoa, really got high, too high.
Yeah, if you're going through, if you're gonna leave and it's gonna be a heroin overdose or something very similar, it's probably not the most miserable experience. That's for sure.
It's not. It isn't actually. It's not. That's the it's better than being mutilated or run in a car accident or there are ways to go. They go into heaven. They go to Neptune. He had Jupiter trine Neptune. He wanted to go to Neptune. He just wanted to go into heaven.
Yeah, he wrote a poem about that actually. It's definitely something that came up. Like once you have tried heroin, what is there besides that heaven? When you come back down, you're not in that heaven anymore, and then you know what it is. So how can you possibly go back?
Exactly. And he's telling the truth. This is why there's so many addicts today, because there's a collective psychosis going on in the world, and there's a collective pain that people can't take, and the numbers of fentanyl and heroin addicts and oxycodone is appalling. I mean, they thought we were bad in the 60s. That's ridiculous. All we did was smoke a bit of pot and take some acid sometimes, Seriously. And then there were the people that got into the hard drugs. And one of them was one of my friends who had died at a party in the bedroom, and that was a drag.
That's traumatic, yeah.
It was horrible. I mean, yeah, no, it's not fun for us who are left behind.
No.
But we're able to look at this and say, make a little sense out of it, and just accept the fact that, it was something that had to happen. He wasn't going to be able to make that jump forward. I'm just looking for anything, Leo. No.
One thing I will say, though, especially with his North Node conjunct Mars, he was always very busy, trying to write and create material, and he wanted to share it with the world. And I think he wanted to be a recognized author at some point. That was one of his dreams. And I'm finding that, now that he's not around, that still hasn't been able to come true. And I think retrospectively, people are going to read what he writes, and they're going to see it and appreciate it for what it is.
Absolutely. We need more work like that out in the world for people to read. I just bought a book that scared the wits out of me, and it was called Love, Hope, and Lithium.
Okay.
And it was a story of this woman who's a great writer for the New York Times and New Yorker and all this. I mean, really, really cute woman, and but crazy, bipolar, and it's just it's such a big secret. You're not supposed to tell people. You can't let them know. It's a terrible, terrible thing to have that. And then, but it was so scary. I scared myself to death almost practically reading the thing. I finally just gave it up and gave it to a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist, and I said, "Read this. What do you think?"
Okay, perhaps we could move to
All right, love. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Okay.
Thank you.
So Carrie couldn't be here today, Erin, so this is her story.
Oh, okay. How many people do we have? Because I want to be able to get everybody in.
We have Carrie, Wendy, Star, and we have...
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah, 3 more.
Because we've only got 15 minutes, and I don't want to...
Excuse me, we have half an hour.
Oh.
We can go over time, yeah. We have half an hour.
Okay, so Carrie says, I've had a near-death experience. It was the day that Saturn crossed into my... Oh, yeah, I was really fascinated with this. Of my first house at 15, 1 month before my 16th birthday, fell off a cliff. God, covered with seaweed in a very narrow path. I was knocked unconscious at one point and drowning. My friend, who had a 3-month-old baby, watched as the tide grew higher. When I came to, I saw that I was going to hit the cliff and be killed. I went into the light, and it was incredible. Oh, I didn't want to come back, except to keep my mom from suffering. I could hear her voice telling me to be careful at the beach. The wave rose so high, I was on top of it and body surfed before being thrown against the rocks. My friend saw that she could catch me and drag me out. Where's the little baby? She risked her life and was successful on the second try. We had to hide what happened. Yeah, I made up a story about falling on some rocks. 15-year-old girls going home saying, I almost died, Mom. Yeah, it wouldn't work. I was able to thank my friend for her bravery and heroism in the last month of her life when she died at the age of 40 from brain cancer. And she visited her for her last birthday. That's very sweet. So I've got Carrie's natal and Carrie near death. I actually had it weird. It's weird. The reason I didn't do this last time, when I was supposed to do it, I actually did almost die on October 21st from a blood clot. I was supposed to be doing this talk. So, yeah, I didn't die and was completely conscious, and they managed to dissolve it by doing some kind of a thing with an MRI. But otherwise, it would have shot straight into my pulmonary artery, and bang, that's it. And my daughter would have been there. It would have been a drag. So I guess I just wasn't ready to do that to her. So Carrie, wow. Yes, you sound like me when I was your age, doing stuff like that. So, okay, there's the natal chart. You're not prone to sort of wild imaginations and flights of fancy necessarily. Although the moon in Pisces, Mars in Pisces, near death. Well, look at all the plants in the 8th house, which is supposed to rule death and sex and taxes. So, and death is very taxing, and it's a tax on life, and taxes are, what we pay. And we had Saturn at 26 Capricorn, Cancer, exactly square Chiron. Chiron's showing up a lot in these charts, you know, don't you think?
Seems to be, yes.
It's really weird because, you know, we've never done a focused session on death and near death and all of that. And, I mean, and, you know, Chiron it's almost as if it actually is what is being said that it is, and that's the wounded healer. So it's supposed to be involved in death in many ways. But we had Mars in Cancer opposite, square to vertex.
Erin, I wonder if Saturn could represent.
Oh, it's Mars square Pluto.
Oh, sorry.
She has Carrie had Mars square Pluto within a couple of days. Saturn is what's making the square to Chiron. And the moon is 11 opposite 13 Neptune. And the fourth house is also a death house. It's called the end of the matter in old books. And with moon opposing Neptune, there she's in the waves, right? The ocean. I mean, it's so symbolic, but obviously not meant to die. But I mean, certainly this aspect here, Sun, vertex, Chiron, Mercury, and Jupiter, all in the eighth house. And then we have Pluto, the only, is actually rising, and it's at 10 degrees, and there's the moon at 11, so it's trying. That was what saved you, is that we have the moon in the chart of this inundation, because that's what Neptune rules. It's the waves and the horses of the waves and the great being swept under and being out of control, and the whole issue of being floating around in the water. Moon was actually trine to Pluto, which is a very good thing, whilst still opposite Neptune. So it was almost like, it's actually amazing that you didn't die looking at this chart. Wouldn't anybody else or does anybody else agree with me?
Yes.
That it's a miracle?
Where would you factor in the baby and the woman who saved her?
I think the baby is a darling thing.
Oh, gosh.
Well, I think that what we're seeing here is a tremendous amount of good fortune in the face of death, loaded eighth house. What we've got is, from the outer planets, we have really positive aspects. And it shows that a woman was involved at the midheaven, the moon in Gemini, in the 10th house, opposite to Neptune at the 4th. Here would be Carrie floating about and crashing around in the waves, death nigh. It takes 4 minutes for this to move, right? The midheaven, 4 minutes. So this is exact 11 degrees to the 11-degree moon. 4 minutes later, the moon would have been in the 9th house. It would have still been on the midheaven, but it would have still been opposite to Neptune, but it would have been in the 3rd. So we're looking at, the house, the 4th house being, again, as I mentioned, another house of death. It's not just the 8th. But the water houses are houses of incarnation, of disincarnation and incarnation. This is where the soul lives. This is where we're born. Yeah, at the ascendant in the 12th house. That's our soul. Our ancestral league is there. So she's very much alive, thrashing about. The woman with the mother, moon, opposite Neptune. You have to sneak away. I mean, your real mom couldn't be told. You had to keep a secret, Neptune. And it was trine Pluto. So it was just absolute timing. I mean, It was
Wow.
not luck, it was timing. This woman must have put her kid aside and went down to get her.
Aaron, this is Wendy. Neptune trining the Aries in the eighth house, would the eighth house in Aries looks like that's what her near-death experience was, right? Aries, like
Yeah,
this
near death.
exploration.
Yeah, near death. I'm going to give this one a try and see if I like it, but it didn't work. And she was saved by a woman, a friend, who was at the midheaven in the situation, by this of Carrie being swept away by the waves repeatedly, and to pull Pluto in, that was being opposed. Well, pretty, it was 10 days, a long opposition. I like exactitude with stuff like this. That the Pluto is very strongly implicated into all three of these and the sun. So the life force was going to be maintained. Pluto opposing the sun is a very dangerous aspect anyway. It always makes me nervous.
Also, that Venus in Pisces trining Saturn, that probably helped some too.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, there she is, Venus 25 Pisces and Saturn 20. Well, you see, there's the friend, Saturn in the 10th house, there's 11th house. The friend who has the stability and the strength to be able to reach out and reach her friend, which is the 7th house. So we had an 11th house, 7th house support system, which is a friend helping a partner, a very loved friend, another friend, the Venus. And so the woman really took on a kind of a masculine, if you will, ethos in order to do the powerful thing she had to do. And so she just stopped being a nilly woman and screaming away and just went, okay, this is what I have to do. So she hardened up, did it, saved her friend. And this is the axis here where it's just sheer luck, absolute bloody luck. Well done, you stayed alive.
Thanks, Erin. That really does describe it, doesn't it? So Wendy's next. We have enough time for two more. So when you're ready.
Oh, this is Carrie. So Carrie, what did you think of that?
She's not here.
Oh, okay. Wendy's mother died, but wasn't found for 2 days. So, Wendy, can you explain just a little bit?
That's correct.
Was she at home? And
yeah, she died in the house. So my mom was a type 1 diabetic, and
okay.
she there's a lot of history there. She was doing some drugs and smoking cigarettes and working and, eating pretty well. But those things, I think, really took her out. She died at 49. So
wow.
my sister had just moved out, and I wasn't talking to her. But the reason why we put down the April 6th as the day she died, because when my sister found her on the 8th, she had been dead for at least 2 days. But also because I felt her leave. And I didn't know what was going on, but I felt this unwinding in my umbilical cord, like from my belly button, and her rising like out up into the sky, up to spirit. So that's why the April 6th date is there. And then April 8th is the actual day she was found.
Well, look at your mother's natal chart. I mean, she had a really hard time. I mean, her entire horoscope is encapsulated between the sun and Uranus, and then it's got this, what I call the disengaged moon. And the disengaged moon would be her drug addiction and her inability to appear to love. She doesn't know what to do. It's the moon in Capricorn. It's completely distant from, and certainly not in any harmony with any other planets. I mean, yes, it's trining the Mercury, but I'm not really seeing that as being particularly effective when it comes to communication. I mean, she's got her moon in the 12th. She's isolated, alone, someone who, never really got any of the right kind of, family needs met. Her
That's correct.
3/4 house has Uranus and Mars in it. There was possibly abuse, beatings, really a harsh parental family upline, including the grandparents and going up through the next generation. And so, Wendy, your mother was really a very, very unhappy person and just didn't want to be here. And sometimes Virgo is very Piscean. I've seen a lot of vertex conjunct Chiron in these charts. That's something I've just noticed. And Vertex was the first article I ever wrote in astrology in 1968. Talk about hubris. And it was on the vertex being the place of fated encounters.
Mm-hmm.
And so she must have had some people in her life who were really not good for her, with all these planets in her 7th house: Venus, Chiron, vertex, Mercury, Jupiter, North Node, and Pluto right on the descendant. So there's another indication of somebody who was really wanting to die in the long run.
Yeah, she was committing suicide for a long time.
Yeah, and a very, having a hard time with depression and probably not getting any help. I mean, she had their moon in Capricorn, exactly quincunx to Saturn, right in the 5th house. 1, 2, 3, 4, just into the 5th, barely. I mean, let's say that she's got a Mars-Saturn conjunction trying to buy the moon. This is not a happy situation.
Yeah, actually, my grandparents were very stoic English.
Quincunx the moon. Yeah.
So there was a lot of emotional. My grandfather was warmer, but it was cold, I would say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, Erin, is that I have the moon in Capricorn at 24.
Wow.
I have Venus in Virgo, like my mother.
Wow.
And my son, my Leo son, is right on her North Node, and you'll see in the death chart that's there too. Mm-hmm. And,
that's fantastic. Oh, so
my Jupiter is right on her Saturn.
Well, you would have tried to make her happy, but you can't make your mother happy. See, that's the problem. I think that she was essentially clinically depressed, the moon in Capricorn, quincunx to Saturn, and it was trining to Mercury, and I think that that's part of this, the transfer of emotional needs locked into the 12th house, and then Pluto descending just a matter of minutes before she was born, after she was born, at her birth. It does talk a lot about a person just wanting to, somewhat like, our previous friend who was a drug addict. She wasn't really attached to the planet.
Yeah. I always knew, actually, from the time I was very young, that she would leave early.
How old was she?
49. Not that young, but still young.
Oh, that's right. No, that's very young.
Mm-hmm.
But she probably lasted as long as she could. Do you think it was an overdose?
No, she had she had arteriosclerosis, a heart condition, and they didn't know it, and she had a massive blockage in the coronary and died right there in the bathroom.
Instantly, and Pluto descending. Good. So she went out fast. And so she was taken by, the Moiri, her lot in life, by Pluto descending at the time of her death.
Yeah. And Uranus was right close to her moon, and
it was almost as if with that Pluto descending in her natal chart, not her death chart, she had Venus setting at the time of her death that you guys have assumed with Jupiter
right.
opposite to it. So that would speak to me with Venus retrograde opposite Jupiter, and would speak to me of a thrombosis, or of a blood clot, something that just happened spontaneously. Venus does have to do with the blood,
Mm-hmm.
and Jupiter with circulation. And
Chiron was on her Jupiter and North Node and Leo.
Yeah.
So more heart. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was. It was definitely heart. And she had. I'm just looking to see if what other aspects might have been to her. Okay, then she was found though when the moon had moved from 19 Libra to 25 to conjoint. You found her. Mm-hmm. She was found when it was conjunct Pluto.
Yeah.
And Jupiter, Jupiter is often found prominent in death charts.
Mm-hmm.
When I looked after my mother for the 6 weeks of the last part of her life, and she, we all had to go away, and then when I came back, she was dead. Anyway, she had died while I was gone, like I told you, and I was going to say something about Jupiter. It's really weird. Yeah, her moon was 18 Aries in the 5th house, and Jupiter was stationary direct at 18 Aries the day she died. It was brilliant. It was like she got out of the pain. She'd been so much surgery, so much drug, alcohol, it was just awful. Regretted her entire life. It was like, oh, for God's sake, Mom, let's just go. It's going to be okay. It's all okay,
Yeah.
But it was Jupiter stationing direct right on her moon, saying this is a good death. Well, it's because she had her daughter there. It was looking after her. I had forgiven her. I hadn't seen her for 8 years at all because she tried to abuse my kids. And I said, that's it, Mom, that's it. It's never going to happen. You'll never again. So when my brother phoned and told me she was dying, I said, oh, shit, I got a decision to make. And so I went, and we had a great time. And she died happy.
Yeah. I'm looking at that Mars opposing Neptune, Uranus. That would be her alone, right?
Sudden,
being by herself.
Sudden.
And also, that Mars would be opposing her, approaching her in opposition to her natal moon in the 6th house. Yeah. Well, there were a lot of actually beautiful things that happened in her death and all that.
Yeah.
But we don't have time to go into it, but in relation to my own spiritual journey. So it was very shocking and scary, but death is never fun.
Apparently not, nobody. I mean, we ended up with having a wake because all my uncles, everybody arrived. Poor Mom was like dead in her bed, and we put on her nice nightie and so on, and they drank like crazy. So it was like this wild Irish wake that took place, and it was sort of like people were going in and sitting on her bed and talking to her, and it was like, okay, she'd love this. I mean, she's having we're having a party, we're smoking pot, drinking booze, and laughing and sitting on her bed as if she were just there having that life. Yeah, there is something about Mars in your mom's chart, death chart, opposite Uranus, Neptune, saying, it would have been sudden and it would have been painless. Neptune, anesthetic. She wouldn't have arrived in pain. No, this was a sudden departure.
Yeah, and that Chiron was right on her Jupiter.
Yeah, and Jupiter rising at the time of death, exactly opposite to Venus. That's very gentle. That's very gentle, and they're both retrograde. I mean, it really tells me that she died peacefully, and later than she would have liked to, but this was the right time for her. I think she was probably into death for a long time.
Yeah.
However, her death time is actually really benevolent. Jupiter rising, Venus setting, Mars rules pain, but if it's opposite to Neptune, it's dulling the pain. It's,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never actually thought about that Mars before until just now. I've never looked at the chart like that. So
that would have been, something really sudden. Just, I mean, there was no avoiding it. It was definitely an abrupt death.
Mm-hmm.
So that she was not in agony.
And you think that Capricorn moon is always clinically depressed?
No, because I'm not I shouldn't be using clinical terms as a non-psychiatrist, but I think the moon in Capricorn has to fight depression and melancholy.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think there's many wonderful people who have it, who write, stories and make movies, and it's very talented, but if there is nothing given to the child with the moon in Capricorn, they grow up deprived and depressed.
Yes.
And can suffer from clinical depression. And, her moon was quincunx to Saturn. So Saturn disposits the moon, but it's quincunx, which means major adjustments needed between the ruler of her emotional needs that are locked into the 12th house, where there's nobody going to find them and see them.
Yes, I always said that she was knocking on the wrong door. Like she had this insatiable need, always trying to get these needs met, and there was never enough. It was like an empty. They would just go in and go out. It was like there's nothing catching them. I was like,
because she never got it when she was young, so she's going to do that to her children.
Oh yeah.
Who would then be, have to run through the whole guilt trip. But the thing is that, it is what it is. Your mother was an unwell person, and she was not treated well as a child herself. How was she to know what to do with Mars and Uranus in her 4th house? It's like, whoa. So I said she probably has experienced serious abuse in her childhood.
Mm.
Absolutely. And it's all square.
She was an only child, so we don't really have any information about it.
Oh, the poor kid. The poor thing. Well, she's happy now.
Oh yeah, I've had many conversations with her, and it's a whole different story. She needed to leave.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, it's been almost 24 years, so I've had a lot of.
Yeah, no, I still talk to my mother, who is absolutely abusive and just completely nuts. But and they listen. It's worth it. It's worth it.
Yeah. Thank you.
You are so.
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this topic.
Oh, you're welcome, Star. Gosh, I mean, when Linda asked me, I thought, well, why not? Then I had a near-death experience the next day.
Well, what's so interesting too when you said that? So this person isn't a family member, but they're a really important part of my life and like a guardian angel in a sense. And the death was really unexpected. And the death was actually on the date you said, October 21st, 2017.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he was only 64.
Well, I'm just 70, so.
Yeah. So he basically was the library director at the art school that I went to. And he was this really generous, really thorough person, really generous. Like he was always helping everyone. He's the most selfless, sane adult I think I've ever had in my life. And he had me house sit his dog for him. And I did that for a number of years. And I was invited to the euthanasia. And then he was also, he fostered a dog that I ended up falling in love with and ended up adopting her. And we were just very close. And I kind of was expecting him to just, be in my life the rest of her life because she's still young. And so when this information hit, it just hit me really hard. So I don't know, I just wanted to bring it up.
Well, how did he die?
So that's the other thing is
Is that a sudden? Did you have a sudden?
Found on a Monday morning when he didn't show up to work. He only had like a year left before he retired. He was this really responsible.
So, excuse me,
everything
wait.
by the book. So we think Saturday or Sunday. So either the night of the 21st or sometimes Sunday.
Okay, well, what I'm looking at is Sun Jupiter opposite Uranus, and I'm wondering if was it a sudden death, unexpected?
Yeah. Super unexpected.
Was a heart attack or what?
Yeah, heart attack.
Okay, yeah, because the more information that we get, I mean, we already know that the poor fellow's gone, but I needed to know, like, because with all these planets in the eighth, it's on. Okay, all right. Let's just say, as the world turns, okay, the horoscope moves 4 degrees every minute at the midheaven forward.
Okay.
Yeah, and so things rise, and so within about right at the time that he had been building toward this massive attack, whatever took place, it was moving with Saturn moving towards the midheaven with the, what is that AS up there?
Erin, I set the chart for 12.
Oh my God, what am I looking at?
That's the death chart. I set the chart for 12 midday because there's no time of death. And so that is the 12 midday ascendant.
Okay, I didn't, and you've got the midheaven in the 7th house. Well, I usually set solar charts if I don't know what time it is.
Oh, okay, thanks.
The solar chart is more accurate. But yeah, okay, so this is, and I'm looking at the wrong houses and everything. Oh dear.
This is just the 0 degrees Aries houses.
Yeah, I get it. I see it now. I see. Okay, but still, we have the powerful opposition of Jupiter and the Sun to Aries, Uranus, which says that it is really sudden. And with the Jupiter and Neptune in a square, Jupiter and Mercury in Scorpio are trining his Neptune. So he wasn't conscious when he died. He was unconscious. So he must have had some kind of seizure. Do you think? Like a brain seizure? A brain seizure. He was not conscious. He was insensate, or as I talked about in my talk, anesthetic. He was anesthetized. He did not have any aesthetic. He had no sense of his world. I mean, I suspect that it was a really sudden a seizure, an attack, embolism.
I honestly just got his information from his sister today, and she wasn't exactly sure on it. That's why some of it's a little unsure. And I don't even know if they've heard back.
So she doesn't know how he died?
It was either a heart attack or it was something where like nobody saw this coming.
Right. Well, no, they wouldn't. I mean, this is something lurking in the system that that is completely unknown. And what but the moment had arrived where he'd have where the sun in the sky had was conjunct Jupiter and exactly opposite Saturn. But it's also involved in a trine to Neptune, that configuration in Scorpio. And that leads me to say that he had possibly a seizure and was actually completely unconscious that he was dying.
Wow.
It wasn't some horrible struggle at home alone, clawing the rug at all. That he went out and then he died.
Wow.
And he has a natal moon Neptune in his chart. So he'd be the kind of person that would, if they're going to die, they would do it without knowing. And they would sort of try and keep it a secret, actually, so other people wouldn't be upset. That's his big concern, a big worry about how other people are going to feel.
Oh, yes. He was so private and kept everything so close, but so concerned with everybody else.
I would think so. I mean, I think he's full of love, this person. And that he, loved people, loved life, was like active, but he was also a dreamer. He had his dreams. I think he was not too successful in relationships, in partners. And so he was alone. But I think he liked it. He got to like it because as a sun in Aries, hey, if you're going to be alone, you might as well be in Aries, and do it well because, with the sun in Aries, no matter of squaring Uranus, he's not really the marrying kind. You know what I mean? In any sense of the word. And so, don't feel bad because he was all by himself and that he was in terrible pain and died a long death. I didn't at all. And also, he would have died. It's interesting. I don't know about dying young and whether you can tell, but that moon Neptune at 22 degrees of Libra, that blows my mind. Like that's pretty unusual. And it actually is a quincunx to Jupiter, so he had to make an awful lot of adjustments in his emotional imagination, like how he thought that love should be. It never seemed to work out that way because he had so much to give because he's Libra with Aries, right? Yeah. So, he's a warrior. He wants to fight for the rights and do this and get everything right and run people's show. Doesn't want to, he's not a really big team person, but he will manage to cope if there's a team that has to be formed.
He volunteered at the Humane Society for Animals. He volunteered at the local Art Students League to do like art stuff. He was very just active as far as what was going on in like the political world.
Right, but he wasn't on the board of directors. Yes.
No, very private. But yes,
absolutely
cared so much.
Yeah, so relationships for him were always a bit of a struggle, and I think that's how he got into the group, because we look for our tribe, sometimes when we're, because the tribal house is the 11th house. It's also the 9th, but tribalism, is the 11th house because it's groups of people. And so I like to look at it as tribes. And so he would form tribes, and they would all be around, interesting, Pisces, real small animals. And he's got Mercury in Pisces. And it's trine to Uranus, so he's going to find unique ways to think his, projects and offer something different, but he's never going to join. He's not a joiner. Mm-hmm. So he might be doing all this volunteer work, but he's not on the board.
Yeah,
but he died young.
A little, art school library, so he was very resourceful, but very contained. Do you what do you think of that North Node on Pluto? That caught my eye, or transiting North Node on his natal Pluto.
North Node, 21 Leo on his. Oh my God, it's exact. Well, that's another indication that he'd come full circle because it's the North Node. And this just happened?
What?
Did this just happen?
Yeah, this was last October.
Okay, because the nodes have gone into Leo now. They're back into the Leo axis, Aquarius. But I think that the North Node conjunctus Pluto, I think it has to say that he really had a date with Persephone, That's it. He went down to see her, and perhaps he and Hades get along rather well. I would think, my experience, I mean, I really don't know. And now that I realize that we don't have the exact time on the death, so I'm not going to look at the angles. But the 25 Chiron at Pisces is also unique because if 25 Chiron, 25 Pisces Chiron, it's in it's in a quincunx to his natal Saturn. So, it's a wound that has been with him all of his life. It's sort of like it was timed, to me, in the sense that he was, just the way that the chart's set up and the natal chart and just the aspects. You don't have to worry about the angles. The aspect of the Sun and Jupiter moving right to oppose Uranus, he'd been having trouble for a couple of days, but it would have been instant. which is good news.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your insights into this. It's really, really helpful. And thank you again for the
Oh,
topic.
I hope so. I hope it is. Yeah. Did it make sense to you?
Yeah, I want to spend a little more time with it. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would. I mean, that's the whole thing is you want to be able to do that and have, more time to just contemplate and play with. I mean, it's very healing, When my friend Howard Susportis died, I was absolutely it was just horrible. And I spent hours doing horoscopes, doing astrology about his death. Even though I knew he was going to die, we knew the day, we knew the minute it was going to happen. He even set it up himself in the hospital. I mean, but then he died, right? So the reality sets in. And I did all these incredible, and I just learned so much, and it brought me so much consolation. It was just the most wonderful thing. Yeah. And I did the same when my uncle died. And then he was gay, and he had a gay partner, and they both died within a month of each other. One couldn't live with the other. He tried, but he didn't. And I did all their astrology, and I found out that they had died at the right time. And when Jim Lewis died, I did the same thing, because he was born with Pluto rising, and he died exactly when Pluto was on his descendant. So every time somebody really close to me dies, I work the astrology. I definitely recommend it. I mean, it's not obsession or weirdness. It actually is informative, and it actually heals. So I recommend that.
Yes, Erin.
Should death stalk, do the horoscope.
Yes, Erin, thank you so much. That certainly was very informative. So we really must go now. Thank you for this 2.5
I still have my question. Is it too late?
So thank you from all of us. And we'll see you next time, Erin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. All the best. Lots of love.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was wonderful.
Great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're very, very welcome. Thank you for being there.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.